Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Inuit, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. On the panel this morning are Ms. Michelle Duncan joining via Zoom and Ms. Linda Schultz joining via Zoom as well. Our assessor this morning is Ms. Corrine Durakany, and our administrative person is Ms. Phoebe Graywood. My name is Bill Moretsky. I will be chairing the panel as well as this meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that would be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 2, 3, 6, and 9 on our docket today. Ms. Graywood, please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony.
Madam Durakany, please state your full name.
Corrine Durakany.
Do you affirm the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mark Newman.
Do you affirm the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, we begin with our first item on the docket today, which is item 2, 101 Burnett. This is an application for revision of assessed value. Are there any preliminary issues with any of the items on the docket today from either party?
No,
Not to me.
we're not.
Okay. Then Ms. Durakany, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-3237, roll number 0400288550 for the address of 101 Burnett Avenue. We are defending the assessed value of $1,421,000 for the roll year of 2025 based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of 3 buildings with 1 story. We have a actual year built of 1967 to 1976 with the wall height of 12 to 16 feet. One of the buildings was built in 1967 with the wall height of 12 feet, and the other 2 built in 1976 with the wall height of 16 feet. With a leasable area of 8,900 square feet. The land to plan area is 2.64. Maps are provided on page 3 showing its location. It is located in the McLeod industrial area. Aerial views are on page 4 and exterior photos onto page 5. Page 6 has our rent comparables. They are net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We provided 8 rent comparables with lease starting in 2018 to 2021. An area range from 6,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet. A wall height range of 14 to 24 feet. An effective year built of 1961 to 1980. And a net rent of $6.53 per square foot to $11.19 per square foot. All of these are storage warehouse like the subject. You will find our income workup on page 7. The one premise of 8,900 square feet with a rent of $9.84 per square foot, providing potential rent of $87,576. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 1.50%, plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $83,140, in which we've capitalized that at 5.85%, in which generates our capitalized value of $1,421,197, in which we rounded down to the $1,421,000 value. You'll find our capitalization rates on page 9, in which provides the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.30 at the 80th percentile. Our cap rate of 5.85 falls in this range. On page 11 is the income and expense questionnaire provided to us, advising a income type of net. It's net income. On page 13 is the monthly rent that accumulates to the $9.49 rent. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $1,421,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, do you have any questions for the assessor?
I do. The last thing you said, page 13 is the monthly rent. And I think you said it shows that it accumulates to $9, and I didn't catch that last number of cents.
49 cents.
Okay. Forgive me, I'm getting my calculator out. Okay, thank you. So, let's come back to the beginning of your brief. As you've noted, page 1, building is built in 3 stages. And original in 1967, and then a couple of additions in 1976. In relative terms for warehouse type properties, ceiling heights of 12 to 16 feet are on the low end. Would you agree?
Correct.
And the building as of today is approximately, depending on what we look at, it's coming on almost 60 years old, correct?
The majority is, I guess it's half. But yes, it's a bit of an older building.
All right. And so then let's jump ahead. Let's go to your page 6, your comparables. I think you said that the majority of them are located in the area where the subject is.
I didn't say that they had the same type. They're all storage warehouses.
Right?
As for the market region, the McKay and Cordite are in the same market region. And quite a few of them are the same M2 manufacturing zoning and similar effective year built near.
Okay. All right, so, and in fact, because I think you're quite right, and I thought what I heard is that they were from the market area, but that's fine. Because my review suggests that only McKay and Cordite are in the immediate market area, and that the majority of them, in fact, are in St. James, and one off Pembina and in Fort Garry. And I just want to spend a couple of moments with them just to understand. 1616 King Edward, is that the A&W at the corner of Dublin and Route 90 opposite Red River Community College?
I have it here as DoorDash.
All right, and that's fine, okay, so, and DoorDash is essentially a grocery store where people can order their groceries through and have them delivered.
Correct.
Okay. And then Chevrier Boulevard, of course, runs off Pembina to Waverly. Daly Street, that runs off Pembina, and this location is to east of Pembina. This is a restaurant and bar, isn't it?
The Daily?
Yeah.
Yeah, Barrel House.
That's right, Low Life Barrel House. Hecla is off sort of to the west of around Keewatin and Logan, correct?
I believe so.
And 1130 King Edward is also obviously in the St. James area.
Yeah.
All right. So and you're using if we jump to page 7 of your brief, that's the calculation of value, and that's a model-driven calculation, I gather.
It is.
Okay. And did you look at the well, let's jump ahead one more page. Sorry, to page 9, that's your capitalization rates. And again, the model has kicked out the capitalization rate of 5.85%, correct?
Correct.
And this property, as we've discussed, is coming on 60 years of age. 5.85%, if you look at the city information and the broker information, we see that you said it comes between the 20th and 80th percentiles, and certainly it does. But generally speaking, it's below 2 of the broker ranges at 6% for either multi-tenant B or industrial B. But just in terms of the quality of the building, if I were to use the word utilitarian to describe the building, it's a basic building coming on 60 years of age, nothing fancy about it, lower ceiling heights, relatively speaking. Would you agree with those characterizations?
I would agree with you.
And yet the capitalization rate, recognizing the quality of the building, is coming, I'll suggest to you, at the low end of the range. Doesn't it make sense that it would have been at the higher end of the range considering the quality of the building?
Well, nothing's to say that the quality is lacking per se, if it's just the year built. More or less, we're seeing the actuals of the space being occupied. And they have a long lease in place. There's no issues of vacancy. So when you look at that, it seems to be the cap value makes sense because there's no risk.
Well, you're saying because it's been occupied, the cap value makes sense because there's no risk.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, do you have any questions for the assessor?
One question. So page 13, you had referenced the accumulated rent at 949. And you're using though for your calculations a rent of $9.84. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why the difference?
It's model generated. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
So you're in your cap rate. And we have an industrial warehouse here. So which of those four subcategories do you think the subject property would fall best into?
Sorry, what was
On
your
the
question?
cap rate chart?
On the cap rate?
Page 9.
Page 9.
Yep.
So the 5.85.
Yeah, there's the industrial section, correct?
Yeah.
And that's where the subject property falls into, but which of the four subcategories does it fall into?
I mean, they're the same. So industrial A or B.
Industrial A or B, okay. They're all the same anyways, okay, that's your point, I get that. But it's closer to the 20th percentile than the 80th percentile, would that be a correct characterization of the model cap rate?
Correct.
And why wouldn't it be closer to the middle?
Well, with our model being generated, it's still classified as a well-maintained property. And with the no issues of vacancy, it's still considered a low-risk property.
The pictures on page 4. The the bottom left. So those are the three buildings we see there. One's lower, then there's the other two bigger ones that are almost the same size, I guess.
Yeah, so that front one was the 1967 building with the 12 feet. And
That's
then
the
the next
lower one.
You got it, yeah. And then next two is the 16 feet, built in 1976.
So the vast majority of this building is the original build date then?
The original one is correct, yeah.
Okay, so then most of it was built in 1967, 68.
Yeah, was only 1,500 square feet, the first building. And the next two was 3,500 and 3,900.
Oh,
So the first building would have been the first
okay,
building built.
okay.
for the smaller.
And then that's the land area where all those trucks are and cars are parked? Or whatever they are, they're the small
The
trucks,
vans or,
pardon me?
or they look like vans or,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's no big trucks that it has to accommodate then for turnaround or anything?
No,
And you couldn't do that really in this property anyways, right? Looks like
correct.
there's
Yeah,
not enough room there.
Turn around.
Okay, I have no further questions. Mr. Newman, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you. And I'm going to give you a little bit more of an extensive presentation on this property, and then I won't repeat it on the other ones, although I'll just touch upon it on the other ones,
Okay.
just to be more efficient. We have a couple of issues here. We have a rent issue. We have a capitalization rate issue. The assessor's at $9.84 a square foot. I make the observation that the assessor's comparables, and I appreciate the assessment is kicked out by the model at $9.84. And I appreciate that the comparables of the assessor on page 6 of her brief, indeed, only 2 of them are at a rate of $9.84 or higher, and that is $3.96 daily. And I've searched all these out so that I'm familiar with them. $3.96 daily is, as the assessor acknowledged, it's the Low Life and Barrel Bar and Restaurant, and that's at $10.29. So that's a hospitality use, I would describe it as. And 1616 King Edward, as I searched that out, 2 different businesses were coming up at that address. One was the A&W, the other is the DoorDash, and that's obviously at the corner of King Edward and Dublin or Notre Dame. It's opposite Red River College, and that's essentially a grocery store which offers delivery. The rest of the comparables are certainly under the $9.84 a square foot. The 2 in the immediate area, Cordite and McKay, are at $6.53 and $8. I'll have a little bit more to say about rent in a moment. But in my brief, and there's a bit of a disconnect here that I've come to recognize, and you'll recall I asked the assessor about the calculation of her rent on a per square foot basis. And certainly the math is correct. When you look at the questionnaire and the monthly rent of $7,038, you do the math, it comes out to $9.49. My difficulty is, and this is what I reference in my brief, I reference a lease being in place at February of 2021 with rents that escalate by 25 cents a square foot every year, starting at 6 1/4 and coming out to $7.25. So there's an inconsistency that is appearing, and ultimately I use $6.75 a square foot because I've actually seen the lease document. There seems to be a problem in the questionnaire, and that's really what I can tell you about that. I'll circle back to that at the end. Now, capitalization rates, and now I'm at page 3 of my brief, and I'm going to walk you through some things here. And as I said, I'm going to do it once in a medium level of detail, and then I won't do it again other than to touch upon it in the subsequent properties. So what's a capitalization rate? It's the required rate of return by an investor. The assessor a couple of times said it's low risk, it's well maintained. Certainly, if a property is derelict, that will impact the attractiveness in the property in the marketplace. The fact that it's well maintained, we'd like to think that every owner would have a reasonable level of maintenance on their property. Reality is, a lot of these properties occupied by tenants, it's the tenant's obligation to maintain under the terms of the lease. So the cap rate is, what does the investor want? That's influenced by alternate returns that are available from other types of investment. As we come into 2023, and indeed it starts in 2022, interest rates start to go through the roof. And remember, we're always at a point in time, so we're at April 1 of 2023. On page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, I talk about interest rates, and I talk about the stark reality that interest rates started to go up. At the bottom of page 4, you see the jump in mortgage rates from early 2022 into April of 2023. There is a significant jump in mortgage rates. At page 5, you see a chart with bond rates. Mortgage rates are always tied to bond rates, and you see a significant jump in bond rates as well. Why? Because inflation started to take hold. We all lived through it. We all know it. Everything started to move up. And then we see at the very bottom of page 5, but really onto page 6, we see a chart speaking to capitalization rates. And you see capitalization rates kind of at their low in the first quarter of 2022. And then you see them move up significantly. And you see a difference between what CBRE classifies as Class A buildings and Class B buildings. And the cap rates in Class B buildings are much higher. And I'm going to suggest to you that the subject is not even a Class B building, it's below that. And that's why I asked the questions I did about its age, its ceiling heights, its clear ceiling, and things like that. It's an older building. It's a utilitarian building. Its location is, it's less than prime in terms of access and things like that. So I then move on at page 7 and 8 and 9 to speak about vacancy rates. I'm not making an overly large issue about this. It is a little unusual to find vacancy at 1.5%, and that is truly low. This, of course, is a single tenant property. When it's vacant, it's 100% vacant. And when it's occupied, of course, it's 100% occupied. But so be it, there we are. Then at page 9, I start to talk about how you categorize industrial buildings. And this concept will become important for this property and the later ones as well. Industrial buildings get ranked essentially on a variety of variables and factors. And they point ultimately to the utility, the efficiency, the usability of the building, all of which ultimately turns into rent that occupants will pay. So at the bottom of page 9, clear ceiling clearance or clear height, essentially how much can they put in there? Modern warehouses have 28 feet of clearance, older frequently less than 20 feet. This one is certainly older, and it is. The city calls it wall height. So it's got 16-foot wall height. Remember, wall height is not the same thing as ceiling clearance, because most of these buildings are built with a girder system, and the girders come down below the line of the roof. And so the clear ceiling area typically is 2 to 3 feet less in these buildings. And so if the wall height is 16, that means the clear ceiling is going to be in the 13-foot, give or take, range. So that's an efficiency factor. Loading docks, what kind of loading docks does it have? Land to building ratios. These are things that factor into the efficiency of the property and how well can it be used. Location, how proximate to major traffic arteries is it? How readily is distribution and access available? Loading doors, are there enough? Fire suppression systems, they're important. Column-free bays, and a lot of these factors you may observe that they perhaps become more important in what I'll call big warehouse buildings. And occupants will pay more for properties that have all of these variables. So I then come to the broker definitions and the broker capitalization rates. So Colliers, for example, again, I don't think this is a class A, I think it's a B. Colliers classifies a B as average to good quality industrial building, somewhat dated, good quality functional space, less extensive features, characterized by lower clear heights and fewer shipping doors. Well, certainly I think the subject would fall into that. CBRE, Class B, properties competing for a wide range of tenants with average or below average rents for the area, buildings in good to fair shape and suitable for tenants seeking functional space at discounted rates. Cushman, a B, is older suburban product with covenants for leases ranging between 3 and 10 years. So the assessor, of course, has their capitalization rate chart, and I reproduce that in here as well, and I'm on page 11 now. But what you see is you see a range of capitalization rates, and you see that, you know, for the Bs, for example, CBRE is putting the range at 6.5 to 7.5%. Colliers is putting it at 6 to 6.75, 6 to 7% rather for Class B in 2023. Cushman is putting the Bs at 6 to 6.75. So what we again see is a range of rates, and this is a common theme that I've seen, frankly, in all the industrial properties I've been doing. There are some capitalization rates that just strike me as absurdly low that are being assigned to some of these older, very utilitarian dated buildings, but that's what the model seems to be doing. I have no idea why, because I don't think the market would see them as being that attractive. Page 13, I reproduced the assessor's capitalization rate chart, and it just summarizes what I just explained to you in terms of where the brokers are putting things. I speak about land to building ratio, more land is better, greater maneuverability, etc. And then I reference an analysis that Altus has done where they look at a number of property sales, and then on to the top of page 14, they talk about B grade having a cap rate in the range of 6.5 to 7.5%. And they note additional risk factors if wall height is less than or equal to 18 feet. These are some factors. So then there's attribute, which is really in many ways a repetition of what I said already. So what I come back to at the end here is the subject property. What are its characteristics? Because here's reality. And you all sit on these panels, you hear appeal after appeal after appeal. You start to get a feel, I'm going to suggest to you, about buildings, because the reality is buildings fit into a range. There's a spectrum for all types of buildings. The question is, where does the subject building fall in that range? And that's really the decision you're ultimately making. Here I say this building has a lower land to building ratio at 2.64 to 1. I'm on page 15 now. Ceiling height clearance is going to be 11 to 13 feet, depending on the area. The tenants are small business operators. Covenants aren't always strong. You're not getting national or international tenants or covenants into these types of buildings. You're not getting government or institutional quality tenants. Upside rent is not as probable because smaller businesses typically have a tighter budget. We've got a rising interest rate environment at April of 2023. I could go and buy a GIC at 5%, and if I bought a GIC for a year, I could get it as high as 5.8% in April of 2023. Getting a sub 6% return on risky real estate is less than desirable. So, you know, the building's okay, it's utilitarian, It's not Class B, A or A rather, it's not Class B. It's a plain ordinary building. It's out of the way. I think 5.85% is too low. I ultimately select 6.75%. Again, Altus notes the range, the brokers note the range, and I'm putting it kind of middle to middle, just a touch over middle higher end of the range at 6.75%. And then the last observation I'll make to you comes back to the rent. Again, I saw the lease, and I have the lease, and what I saw was rent ranging from 6.25 to 7.25, stepping up 25 cents a square foot every year in the 5-year term running from 2021. I used 675, which was the average. Obviously, there's a disconnect with the questionnaire and some of the information there, but I do come back to the assessor's rents and her comparables, and I say to you simply, even her own comparables don't support $9.84. There's only two that are at that level and above. One is the Daily property, which is a hospitality restaurant bar, and the other is King Edward, which is the grocery store with delivery, the DoorDash type of operation. All the rest of her comparables are below. The two in the what I'll call neighborhood, so to speak, McKay and Cordite, are at $6.53 and $8. So I'm inviting you to use my $6.75. I'm inviting you to use the cap rate of 6.75%. And you can see on my page 18, that turns into a value of $842,000. Those are my submissions. I'm open to questions.
Okay, Ms. Durakani, do you have any questions for the applicant on his presentation?
Yes, I have a few. Mr. Newman, were you able to find comparables?
Not in the immediate neighborhood.
Okay, so you would agree with me that it was difficult to find comparables for this particular property. Would you perhaps agree that possibly some similar properties are more so owner occupied in this case?
I think that's often the case with smaller buildings. They do tend to be owner occupied, yes.
So that's why I had difficulty finding the good comparables.
Yeah.
I had another question about the vacancy aspect of it. The current tenant, would you happen to know how long they've been renting at this property?
I don't. I only know that this lease came into place in 21. I don't know the prior history.
As far as I can tell, they've been in there for quite some time. So that would reassure me that there's no vacancy issues. That's just a comment I wanted to make. Because they're still in there after being there for some time. I was going to mention, and unfortunately, I don't have it in my evidence, so unfortunately it is hearsay, in regards to the whole effective year built. They actually had renovations done. So they were owner occupied. There's a note that they made renovations before they moved in. But that is difficult to say what kind of renovations were done. I just want to make that comment that sometimes it's difficult to really know how well maintained the building is, and is it also necessary for the use of it. So I just wanted to make that comment, but that's all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions?
One of them was asked and answered. The other one is, again, if you don't have the history, you might not know this, but the last sale is noted like way back in 2007. Are these the same owners that purchased it back then, or do you know how long they've owned it for?
I don't know with certainty. I can only assume that's the case, but I truly don't know.
That's my only question. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Just one question. So this was for April 2023, where the value is at the 1.421. Do we have what it was prior to that? Seems like a huge increase.
My brief records the fact, page 2,
Oh, sorry.
that this was appealed for 2023. That was my first involvement with the property.
Right.
And as a result of the hearing, the value was $793,000. It is a huge increase.
Okay,
For
thank you.
what is really a very basic, and again, buildings are basic sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with basic, to be
Yeah.
clear, but it's really a pretty basic building.
Yeah, but no huge renovation since the 2023 hearing.
No.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Do you have any photos of the inside of the building, Mr. Newman?
I do not.
So you said that the roof trusses were lower than the wall height. Are you sure about that?
Well, again, these buildings are frequently built with a truss and girder system, and they do hang down. The city's yardstick measurement is the wall height. And of course, the trusses sit on the top of the wall.
Have you seen the inside of the building?
I have not.
So your rent amount of $675, you said you had a lease there. Couldn't quite wrap my head around your argument on this one. Because this 2022 mailer has the rent at $7,038, I believe, right?
It does.
Which you say is correct.
I don't say it's correct. I say it's causing me an issue because when you do the math, as I asked the assessor, that comes to $9.49. I acknowledge that.
I know it's 49 cents.
Yeah, that's what's causing me the problem because I've seen the lease document, which shows a sliding scale starting at 6 1/4, ending at 7 1/4, stepping up 25 cents each year over the 5 years. That's what's causing me the problem.
Okay, but are you disputing that amount that's on the mailer then, or?
Well, I guess I am. And I'll have to investigate that further. I think somebody's made a mistake. But this is the evidence you have. I'm explaining it to you as best I can.
Okay. I have no further questions on that, so anything in summation, Mr. Rockney?
No, thank you.
Mr. Newman?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, that concludes this item number 2, 101 Burnett. So we will move on now to item number 3, which is 1239 Manahan. And this is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Mr. Rockney, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you. File number 24-3536, roll number 03065985200, 1239 Manahan Avenue. We are defending the assessed value of $1,248,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of one building with 7 premises with 2 stories, built in 1998 with the wall height of 12 feet. A leasable area of 7,662 square feet with a land to plan area of 1.78. Page 3, we provided a few maps showing its location. It is situated off of Pembina Highway, off of Chevrier Boulevard. We provided aerial views on page 4 and exterior photos on page 5. Page 6 has our rent comparables. They are net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We've provided 6 rent comparables with the lease starting in 2018 to 2022. An area range from 6,952 square feet to 9,000 square feet. A wall height range from 22 to 28 feet. An effective year built of 1998 to 2009. And a net rent of $9.36 per square foot to $10.63 per square foot. You'll find our income workup on page 7. The 7 premises totaling 7,662 square feet with a blended rent of $9.60 provide a potential rent of 73,558. We reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4.5%, plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of 66,762. We've capitalized that at 5.35%, in which our capitalized value of $1,247,888, in which we rounded up to $1,248,000. You'll find our capitalization rates on page 9, in which provides the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.30 at the 80th percentile, in which our cap rate of 5.35 does fall in this range. On page 11 is a listing of the subject property, showing the $20.95 per square foot advertised. There is description of the property below, basically stating that it is in a great location, as well as interior photos that follow on page 12. Onto page 15. There is a more recent listing on page 16 that does advertise it to $15 per square foot. Showing a floor plan on page 7. And again, a bit of a description at the bottom there, well-designed industrial building located in Southwest Winnipeg. And on page 18 and 19 is the income and expense questionnaire provided to us, advising of the gross income, adding up to $17.74. However, on page 19, with all the listings of the monthly rent, I'm getting a $19 there. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $1,248,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mr. Newman, any questions for the assessor?
I do. And I'll indicate to the panel, I have some rebuttal evidence, but I presume we'll finish with the assessor, we'll finish my evidence, and then we'll get to the rebuttal.
Yes, okay, you're correct.
So, yes, again, so page 1.78 land to building ratio, wall height 12 feet, metal frame building. Page 2, you don't list any subject leases found. Why is that?
That was automatically generated. So I'm not sure why that was placed like that.
Okay, and I appreciate that that these briefs are to a certain extent automatically generated. But I've also seen briefs where the leases are listed. But bottom line is, as you noted earlier, page 19 of your report does have the questionnaire and it does list the leases, correct?
Correct.
And part of the difficulty with properties that have gross leases, which is what the subject has agreed, part of the difficulty is figuring out what actually is the net rent, which easily then slips into a spreadsheet to run the calculation. Do we agree on that?
I agree, yes.
All right. So then we jump ahead to let's look at page 5. And so this is built as an industrial building in the sense that it's metal frame. But it's not really used exactly as an industrial building, isn't it? It's more office-like, isn't it?
It's a good question. I mean, there are 7 premises.
Right.
I'm not quite sure what each one of them are actually using it as, but it is,
What I'll suggest to you, when you've got 7,600 square feet leasable, that's then broken up into 7 premises. That's not going to be, it's going to be very small industrial spaces if you simply do the math. And in fact, the photos in your brief at pages 12 through 15, and I appreciate these may be dated somewhat, but it really reflects office development as opposed to industrial, doesn't it?
there are options. It could still be used as a storage warehouse.
Sure, all right, fair enough. Do you know anything about washrooms in this building? If I were to suggest to you that on the second floor, there's only a single washroom and all the occupants on the second floor have to share that washroom, do you know anything about that?
I do not know.
So then we jump to page 6 and the comparables. Do you select these comparables, or does the system simply generate them automatically and they come into your brief?
We're able to select the ones that we feel are most compatible.
And you say you're able, did you actually do that in this case, or did you simply take the output that the system gave you and insert it into the brief?
No, I was able to choose.
All right, and if I were to suggest to you that each and every one of these comparables are what I'll call large industrial facilities, with some of them being hundreds of thousands of square feet. I appreciate there may be individual premises that are smaller, but these are large industrial warehouse developments, sometimes hundreds of thousands of square feet. Do you agree with that?
I don't think all of them, but some of them, I could agree with you.
You know, for example, 1725 St. James. Some of us may be old enough to remember there used to be a Labatt's Brewery location on the corner sort of Notre Dame and Dublin. In that area there, that was replaced by a large rental development consisting of 3 buildings, which is over 300,000 square feet. Do you know about that at all?
I do not, because I don't think it's that any longer.
Well, it's not Labatt's any longer. I agree. It got replaced with the large industrial type development, which is hundreds of thousands of square feet. I'm asking you if you know about that.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm getting to, and this will be part of my rebuttal with photos. These are all, each and every one of these premise leases that you've used as comparables are part of large developments, far, far larger than the subject property. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do
Okay.
agree with that.
And, you know, your wall height or the wall height in the subject property is 12. The wall height in all of your comparables, the lowest one is 22 and it goes as high as 28. Very different than the subject property. Do we agree?
Yes, with the wall height. I was leaning towards the effective year built because they're newer properties.
Okay, fair enough. So I think you're saying that age was the primary criteria that caused you to select this group of comparables for the subject. Is that fair?
Correct.
All right. But do we agree with me in terms of the size and in terms of the attributes, which I talked about earlier for warehouse type development properties? Clear ceiling height, loading docks, maneuvering area. Do we agree that they are all very different than the subject property?
Somewhat different.
Somewhat different, okay?
There is, what I was looking at is the current tenants. There's one of them that's occupying half of the square footage. So that was kind of what I was aiming towards, is that even though they're individual spaces, that currently there's one tenant that's grouping a lot of space.
Which building, which space is occupying half the building?
It is the, if you look on page 7, it'll be the first two and the 271.
Just a minute, I'm, all right, I get what you're saying now. What you're saying is when you look at page 7, which is the model calculation, you're saying that the first two, 2,431 square feet and 1,634 square feet, those two units represent half the space?
As well as the 271.
But what does that got to do with the comparables?
In trying to find a larger space to match up with the subject.
I see. So your comparables are all in the range of, say, 6,900 to 9,000 square feet. And what you tried to do, I think you're saying, is page 7, the first two units, 2,431 and 1,634, plus the fourth one at 271, in combination, those represent half the subject building?
In a sense, I was trying to see, in all fairness, the whole property. If it were to be, in seeing that one tenant is accumulating quite a bit of some of it, that it could increase the space.
Okay.
To all of it.
So page 7, everything is model driven, agreed?
Agreed.
5.35% cap rate. So when we look at the cap rate charts, that is the 20th percentile. That is essentially saying this building is amongst the very best buildings of an industrial type in the city of Winnipeg. That's what 5.35 means at a 20th percentile, correct?
In a sense, it could go lower. That's just our 20th percentile. There are others that could go lower than that.
I'm sure there are. Will you agree with me that this subject building is not amongst the very best industrial or office buildings in the city of Winnipeg?
Actually, don't agree with you. Based on the area, it is great location and it's a newer property.
I see.
It's not-
So
it's not an
you
old-
think,
Okay, let's move on from that argument.
all right,
But here we have to agree to disagree on that one.
fair enough.
I'll agree to disagree.
Page 11, you brought this listing forward. How old is this listing?
This one, I am not aware the exact date. And that's why I also added the more recent one,
Okay, the more recent one, which is page
16.
16, that's got an asking rate of $15 gross. You appreciate asking rents aren't always achieved,
Correct.
and CBRE and Peter Kaufman, you and I had a conversation about this. I suggested to you that Peter Kaufman at CBRE hasn't existed for quite a number of years. suggesting therefore this is going to be an older listing. Do you agree?
Did he do both of the listings or just one of them?
I only see his name on the second one. I don't see a name on the first one.
Okay. I had found it online and it seemed to be still active.
Okay. I'll put it to you that CBRE, as it existed when Peter Kaufman was there, was the firm that Marcel Chartier owned. He was the CBRE franchisee in Winnipeg at the time, and eventually CBRE got rid of them because they didn't want to have franchisees anymore. So CBRE with Peter Kaufman at it has not existed for many years. Do you have any knowledge about that?
I do not.
All right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions for the assessor?
Just again, trying to get a feel for, with there being so many premises, what are they used for, breakdown and all that. I just kind of defaulted a bit back to the listing you did provide on page, sorry, before the pictures. On page, 11. So when I read that description, there isn't anything in that description that would indicate industrial. It looks like suite and office space. Is that your understanding of that description? I know we don't know how old it is, but based on the pictures, it looks like offices, potentially a suite.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're not showing every space, so it's really hard to know, but the ones that is correct, I would agree with you that it looks like the one they're showing is an office space.
Like, is this listing, again, I know you just pulled it offline, but is it just specific to one area of the building, or was it for the entire building? Because there really is no reference to industrial at all.
Yeah, I would say this one in particular would be for what was available that they needed to have a renter. So I have not been there to see, so I can't say for certain, but I would suspect it is just for one of the spaces that needed to be rented out, because right now as far as I can tell, they're all being rented out.
Okay.
Except for the very last one, which is 311 square feet. So it is my understanding that it's just the office space for the one that they're seeking.
But then what's a little confusing about that is there isn't one picture in here that shows more of a warehouse space. Do you have any pictures showing the warehouse space of it?
Do not, no, just the listing photos.
Okay. Oh, so those are the listing photos
Yeah,
connected to.
with the listing, yeah.
And have you been in the building? Have you seen it?
I have not, no, unfortunately.
And then when we're looking at the blueprint, can you point out any area in that blueprint? It says the second floor plan, so I guess it's not showing us the main floor, but nothing there that's industrial either, right?
Doesn't really say it. Just steel frame construction. Yeah, doesn't really say the different types of usage it could be.
Okay, no further questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions for the assessor?
Yes, just one. So you said you hadn't gone there to visit the place at all. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to just Google the address, and you can see that these are just office spaces that they're utilizing. In here, I can't find anything that shows warehouse at all. Like there's counseling, there's some studio massage, psychology, massage areas. So to me, it's more like those pictures that you showed where they are office buildings that are being utilized in this space, not industrial warehouse at all. Because you can certainly go by the address that these are all active, businesses.
That's fair. It's a fair comment.
Okay, no other questions. Thank you.
Hey, a lot of my questions have been asked and answered already by two panel members, but I just want to get back to this office versus industrial issue and my take or angle on it. So you do typically inspect these properties?
Not myself. Originally, once the initial build, we do, but not since then. Unless there's a 311 inquiry.
Well, on your rents, page 7 of the model spit out here. This was on the basis that it was a industrial warehouse, correct?
Correct, and a storage warehouse as well.
Storage warehouse.
Yeah, well,
If it was an office,
yeah,
same
actually,
configuration, if it was an office, what would that model have spit out differently?
a flex warehouse. And the comparables I chose are actually flex warehouses. Meaning
What would
multi.
you have done to the rent numbers, up or down? Or same?
Good question. For office space, flex warehouses, probably around the same. They're, yeah, all based on actual rents.
I have no further questions then, so Mr. Newman, you haven't done your presentation yet, right? Okay,
I have not.
okay, please begin your
All
presentation.
right, and
Then we'll get on to rebuttal after that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll just make the observation, and it's came up in member Duncan's questions about page 17 of the assessor's brief and that second floor plan. You can actually see in the writing on the plan, the identification of who the occupants are, the square footage, and you can also see lease expiry dates. And I can see, for example, a lease expiry date of November 14 of 2014 for the 311 square feet, sort of closest to the bottom of the plan. I can see over to the left, a tenant looks like Track It Back, lease expires December 2011. I only point to that just to speak a little bit to the age of this plan. I don't say it's not accurate. It is accurate, and again, from my discussions with the property owner, the second floor is hollow core concrete. So it's hollow core floor on the second story. That's what the listing at page 17 of the assessor's brief describes. And again, it's a building that certainly it could be industrial by its construction, but I think reality is it's become an office type use, and I'll get into that in more detail when I come to my brief. So, into my brief. Page 2, land area 7,991 square feet, as we've discussed. Classified as a 7,662 square foot warehouse built in 1998. All the leases on the property are gross, something important to keep in mind, which I'll come to in a moment. The prior assessment from 2023 was $815,000, reached by agreement with the assessor. And so we're now looking at an increase of about $433,000, more than 50%. I identify the issues as rent, vacancy, and capitalization rate, and I'll keep going. So the assessor uses $9.60 a square foot. Manahan runs parallel to Chevrier Boulevard. It's in that area of what I'll call Fort Garry Industrial. You've got a hodgepodge of buildings. Certainly some of the buildings fronting onto McGilvery are very attractive, modern buildings. Some of the stuff that's in behind, it's older. There's a lot of automotive related uses in that area. The area is predominantly industrial. I would agree with that. But this property, I think, ultimately has really become an office type use. Because the leases are gross, it's difficult to figure out what net rent is being paid by the tenants. And so I come about it in a somewhat of a different way. I'm on page 3 of my brief. I tell you what the net operating income is in each of 2021 and 22. The questionnaires are attached. I'll show them to you in a moment. The average net operating income is $47,150. That contrasts with the assessor's net operating income of $66,762. So a very big difference of about $19,000 between the model's perception of how the building will perform and what's actually happening on the ground. The questionnaires also reveal the annual expenses. And remember, these are gross leases, so the landlord pays everything. And what the questionnaires tell us is the expenses in 22 total $82,713, which works out to $10.79 a square foot. In 21, it's $8.77 a square foot, but the space was 12% vacant. And in 20, it's $7.90 a square, 96 cents, but 18% vacant. And of course, the expenses are impacted by vacancy because it includes utilities, hydro, water. So the expenses are somewhat reduced in 2020 and 21 compared to 22 when there's full occupancy. I end up setting the net operating income at $50,000. That's above the average. The average is $47,150. I set it at $50,000, which is higher than any of the, which is higher than the average of $47,150. Vacancy, I'm accepting the 4.5, but I do point out that it was 12% in 2021, 18% in 2020. You've got a building with a larger number of occupants, approximately 7 in number. Small business people, they come, they go. Sometimes their businesses fail. Sometimes their businesses are succeeding. They move on to bigger and better space. There's turnover that creates vacancy. Okay, now we're into capitalization rate. And you're going to see a lot of what you saw from me on the last property. So I'm not going to repeat it in the same level of detail. But capitalization rate reflects the expected rate of return by an investor. And I say to you very simplistically, if I'm a buyer of this real estate, I look at this building and say, it's not the nicest building. It's not in the nicest area. It doesn't have high quality tenants, relatively speaking. From an investment perspective, from a risk perspective, it's not wonderful. The assessor gives it a 5.35% capitalization rate. The 20th percentile, and I suggest to the assessor that means it's amongst the very best. And she says, well, yeah, that's what it means generally. There are buildings with lower capitalization rates. And yes, God knows I know that because I see them and I scratch my head at some of those as well. But that's a different issue. 5.35% is just too low. I'll get to that in more detail. Increased cost of borrowing, pages 4, 5, and 6. You've heard me on this already. Interest rates are moving up big time. And by April 1 of 23, the mortgage rates have moved up, the interest rates have moved up. Page 8, I've got, and top and 9, some Johnson report vacancy data. Skip over that. I'm accepting the 4.5%. Page 9 and following, we get into the concept of categorization of buildings. And again, every building has got its attributes. The task for you ultimately is, where does this building fit into the spectrum of buildings? The assessor says it fits amongst the very best at 5.35%. With respect, I just have a great deal of difficulty with that. I don't think it fits amongst the very best of buildings at a 20th percentile. And of course, complicating matters is it's been valued as an industrial building, when in reality, I don't think it is. The assessor's brief certainly has the full cap rate chart. And if you look at office buildings, you can see that, you know, and again, we get into the great debate about suburban office buildings and where do they fit into the spectrum. But certainly the brokers are saying suburban office buildings, Colliers puts them 6 to 7, CBRE puts them 7 to 8, and Cushman puts them 6 3/4 to 7 3/4. So much, much higher ultimately than the subject. So at page 9 and 10, I deal with attributes, and I talk about the attributes of a warehouse type property and what's good and what makes it better and what makes it more valuable. And frankly, I'm not sure much of this really is applicable, because I think ultimately we're really dealing with an office building in many ways. So if I keep moving ahead, I come to page 14, the Altus cap rate analysis. And again, I would say to you, at best, this is a B grade building. Altus says 6.5 to 7.5. I'm not even sure it's an investment grade building. I think frankly, it might be less than investment grade. But if I look at page 16 now, 1998 construction, it's approximately 27 years old, limited land area, 12-foot wall heights. It's not class A. Curb appeal is not very good. Locationally, I think it's lesser quality. I know the assessor will say it's wonderful. I don't think it's wonderful. Small business operators, covenants aren't as strong, frequent turnover. It leads to vacancy and increased costs. You're not getting government or institutional quality tenants in this type of building. And when you don't have strong tenants in a building, you get turnover, and your upside rent increases are not as probable. Interest rates are going up. At the end of the day, again, when you can get north of 5% on GICs, are you buying a building of this quality at 5.35%? My suggestion is that you're not. So let's go through the rest of my brief. Page 18 is a photo of the building. Page 19 and 20 is the assessor's calculation. Page 21 is my spreadsheet. And what I've done here is I've laid out the occupants and I've laid out their square footages. I'll show you in a moment what their actual rents are on a gross basis. And I've modeled $55,000 of potential gross income, assessor's vacancy, assessor's shortfall, assessor's non-recoverable. It gets me to a net operating income of $49,569. I apply a 7% capitalization rate. That comes to $708,000. Let's look at page 22. Page 22 is the questionnaire at January 31 of 2023. You'll see there has been circled, well, in the middle column, there's a calculation. There's the total expenses of $82,713, dividing by 7,663 square feet. That's $10.79 a square foot of expenses that the landlord is absorbing under a gross lease scenario. On page 24, here's a listing of the tenants, and you see the math to figure out what their gross rents are. And you can see they range from a low of about $16.40 to a high of about $24. And with many of them in the range of 16, 17, 18. But of course, you've got to take $10.79 a square foot off of that to figure out what the rents really are. Then at page 26, I give you the questionnaire for 2022, January 31 of 22, which shows a 12% vacancy and also expenses of $67,000 odd. And again, remember, because of the vacancy, the expenses are down. And then I show you at page 28, the questionnaire from January 31 of 21. So essentially, I've given you the questionnaires for 20, 21, and 22. And again, you see the 18% vacancy, and you see the expenses of $61,049, which calculates to $7.96 a square foot. So let's come back to what I've done, and then I am just about done. If you go back to page 3 of my brief. I tell you there, I show you there what the net operating income revealed by the questionnaires is for each of 2021 and 22. And I'm doing this because these are gross leases, so it gets complicated to figure things out. You can see that 20 is 45,000 plus, 21, 42,000 plus, 22 is 53,000 plus, 22, of course, is the year where there is no vacancy. So that's going to be up a bit. And I tell you ultimately that I'm going to set the net operating income at $50,000, even though the average is $47,150. And if you then go back to my spreadsheet, which is my page 21, you'll see that my net operating income is actually $49,569. So I rounded a bit, but ultimately what you're faced with is what's the net operating income? 49,000 and change, or 66,762 as the assessor is using. What's the cap rate? 5.35 as the assessor is using. I've used 7%, taking into account the age and quality of the building. And those are my submissions, and I am open to questions.
Thank you. Mr. Rockany, any questions for the applicant on his presentation?
Mr. Newman, have you had the opportunity to inspect the property?
I have not.
Would you happen to know when approximately the shift happened from a storage warehouse aspect to office space?
Oh, well, it's a lot of years. And in fact, it may well be from the beginning, but I don't know that with certainty. But I know certainly from the listings and the photos that are in your brief and some of those dates on that second floor plan, I know that for sure it's 10 years. But I think it may well have been as it is from the beginning, because once a building is built, you don't put hollow core concrete into the building to create the floor for the second floor.
My other question would be about the vacancy aspect. How far back did they have a vacancy problem, would you say?
Well, I'm reporting the 3 years of questionnaire information. And again, it's not unusual in my experience. Small tenants come and go for good reasons and bad reasons. And ultimately I've left the vacancy at 4.5%, which is the model vacancy. But I just did want to point out that buildings of this type with a lot of small tenants, they're subject to the inherent risk that they come and go for good reasons and bad. Their businesses are failing, their businesses are getting better, they need more space. and so there's turnover and vacancy is not unusual. The point simply is that creates risk to a landlord greater than 5.35%, I say.
I was just curious regarding the further back than the 3 years, if the 3 years would pertain to maybe due to COVID. If they are office spaces, maybe that was why they were having that vacancy issue. I was just wondering if you had anything prior to that. Regarding the individual tenants, you didn't have any comparables yourself?
I did not. I focused, because it was a gross lease structure, I focused on the property.
Fair enough. Would you say, and again, I appreciate the difficulty finding the actuals with the whole gross income aspect. Would you possibly agree that with individual spaces, more or less the rent would be higher due to the individual spaces rather than a bigger space?
In theory, and perhaps what you're alluding to is the concept of economies of scale. And you know, that absolutely is a valid concept. In theory, but of course, then you have to come to the specific building and you know, its attributes and its location and its quality, etc. Because that ultimately will drive what a landlord can achieve by way of rents from the property. So economy of scale is good in the abstract, but what's really happening on the property is more important.
And would you say that at this time it's considered low risk with the tenants filling most of the space minus that last little bit? And the one that's increased the space, like the one tenant has increased its space utilizing?
Again, inherently with small business tenants, good things and bad things happen in their business lives. And so you inherently get turnover. Sometimes you may get a tenant who stays for a very long time because they're comfortable. But so I don't think, no, the risk is lower simply by the fact that you've got a tenant who may occupy for a period of time.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions for the applicant?
No further questions, thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions?
Yeah, just to clarify, so what is your NOI? Which one, which number, the 50 or the 49569?
49, what's in the spreadsheet? The 49569.
Thank you. No other questions.
Okay, and I have no questions. And we will go to your rebuttal then.
Right.
And I have it yet,
It should be in there.
but I haven't refreshed, so that's probably why. I have it. Everybody have it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
I'll be brief on this. What this is it's a series of photos essentially attached to an email starting at page 2. And these are the assessor's comparables. And I think we've covered a lot of this in cross. The address appears at the bottom of the last of the photos that relates to that property. So what's page 2 in the email, at least as I'm seeing it, is 1725 St. James. That's the former Labatt site. There's 4 large buildings on that site: Quadreal, is the large industrial developer, is the management for that property. This is over 300,000 square feet. It's a completely different animal, I suggest to you. The next page or the next photo is an overhead. You might think you're looking at a golf course, but it's not. This is the Terracon Business Park on Elan, E-L-A-N, which is located off Dugald. And Terracon builds industrial parks. They've got the Tuxedo Business Park on Keniston as well. A lot of landscaping are part of their parks. Again, large industrial development. And page 4, there's a photo that has got the reference 101 Elan. That's the building in which the comparable is found. And you can see this is a very large building with multiple units, a very different animal than the subject property. The next 2 photos are a property known as 55 Henlow, which is in Fort Garry Industrial Park. You get to Henlow off of Sturfield. By coincidence, this building houses a gym called Serratus, which I happen to go to, so I'm quite familiar with the building. Again, you can see it is a major industrial building in a significant industrial park, very different animal. The next photo, and again, there are 2 of them. One is overhead, the other is a view. This is 1109 Wilkes. Again, 2 large industrial buildings, very different, modern buildings. You can see in the second photo, which says 1109 Wilkes in the lower left, these have got dock level loading bays for the trailers. Again, very different, substantial buildings. And then the next one is 975 Thomas. Thomas is off Nairn, running to the south. And again, a large building with landscaping, very different than the subject. And then the final building is 130 Midland. Midland is the street that runs into Notre Dame. If you remember the Canadiana Motor Hotel or know of it, that's where Midland is. And again, a very large industrial development, very different than the subject. So the point I wanted to make simply is that the comparables are very different than the subject property. I think we all understand that now, and I'll say no more. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ruffini, any questions on the rebuttal?
No, I do not.
Ms. Duncan, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. That will conclude this matter of 1239 Manahan. And I think it's a good time to take a 10-minute break. We are back. Call the meeting back to order. Next item is item number 9, 1110 Sanford. This is an application for revision of the amount of assessment.
Number 6.
Are we not doing 6?
Oh, excuse me. Item number 6, 695 Camille Sis. An application for revision of assessed value. Mr. Rockney, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you. File number 24-3306. Roll number 0609346875 for the address of 695 Camille Sis Street. We are defending the assessed value of $2,620,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of 1 building with 2 premises, 2 stories, with an actual year built of 2015 and a wall height of 12 feet. leasable area of 17,132 square feet with a land to plan area of 10.15. Page 3 are a few maps showing its location. It is situated in the St. Boniface Industrial Park. We provided some aerial views on page 4 and 5 and exterior photos on page 6. We provided 6 rent comparables with the lease starting in 2018 to 2021. Area range from 10,000 to 16,915 square feet. A wall height of 15 to 26. A effective year built of 1980 to 2015. And a net rent range of $6.53 to $12 per square foot. All in which are the same as a subject for storage warehouse. You will find our income workup on page 8. The 2 premises total the 17,132 square feet with a blended rent of $8.79, providing potential rent of $150,542. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 1.5% plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $142,807, in which we've capitalized that at 5.45%, in which generates our capitalized value of $2,620,312 and rounded down to $2,620,000. On page 10, you will find our capitalization rates, in which provides the industrial range of 5.35 to 7.30. Our cap rate of 5.45 falls in this range. Page 12 to 14 is the income and expense questionnaire provided to us, advising it is owner occupied. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $2,620,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Mr. Newman, any questions for the assessor?
I will have some questions. I'm going to ask for about a 20-second indulgence by the board, so I can extend my parking.
Will you, with your phone? Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
Thank you. All right. Just looking at your comparables, so your rent, that's good. Let's go to page 8 of your brief. Your rent is $9.14, also $7.21 for storage mezzanine. So now let's come back to the comparables. Of your list of comparables, there are 3 that are above, actually 2 that are above the $9.14. 91 Lowson Crescent, $11.18. Do you know what occupancy occurs in that space?
We have it as Acon.
Right. So Lowson runs off Keniston, and there's an A&W at the corner of Keniston and Lowson, opposite the IKEA, and that's Acon, which is an engineering firm, correct?
I'm not certain.
Okay. Well, all right, but you do know that it's Acon, so I'll suggest to you that it's a professional engineering firm occupying as office space. And then 963 Dugald at $12. Do you know who the occupant is there?
It's Jade Transport.
Right. And do you know what J Transport does?
I do not, but they're all storage warehouses, these properties.
Right. Well, and that's fair. My knowledge of Jade and my investigations indicate they are a specialized hauler of liquids, chemicals, asphalt, food products. And this is their facility where those vehicles, which need specialized care, are looked after. But you don't have any knowledge of that, I'm gathering.
I don't, just
All
that it's storage warehouse and a M2, just like our subject.
All right, fair enough. And the rate of $7.21 for the storage mezzanine, no comparables. Does that not strike you as a bit high for mezzanine space?
Not necessarily. It's considered as just extra space added to the building.
All right. So then we get back to the capitalization rate and 5.45%. And again, the very low end of the range, I'll suggest to you. Any idea why the model puts it at the low end of the range?
Most likely due to the new build of 2015.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions for the assessor?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions?
Just a couple. So the subject property, that's the net rent, not the gross in your calculations?
On the page 8,
On page, sorry, yep.
that is correct. That's the net.
The net. And then the land plan at 10.15, is there subdivision opportunities with that type of property?
I have not had the chance to look at it. I'm looking at page 4 right now. With the layout of the building. Hard to say. It looks like there's just the one entrance.
And then my last question is there an actual range in the wall height? You have it as 12, but when I look at the building, it looks like there's 2-story on the front where you see 2 levels, but on the side towards the back, you see loading dock overhead doors. So is there a range in the wall heights, or is it 12 all the way through?
We have it as 12 all around. Yeah, the 2 stories.
So would that make sense with the door on the side taking up, like it doesn't look like this, the side, the back is a 2-story. It looks like an overhead door, a loading dock or something like that, or drive-in, whatever.
Which photo are you looking at?
Page 6, the side view, I believe it's the front view in the first picture, which shows it's like a 2-story, but then the side picture just below that shows 2 overhead doors, white, one's halfway open.
That's a good question. As far as we know, it's just 2 stories. With the 12 feet. But maybe Mr. Newman has something I don't have.
Okay, that's fine for now. Thank you. No other questions.
I'm having a little trouble as well, trying to figure out where the mezzanine is here when I look at these pictures. Can you help me out with that? I'll see what our answers are. Would you mind if Mr. Newman answers the question?
Of course, if he knows.
Okay, Mr. Newman.
The mezzanine area is really the second floor, and you can see in the photos that at the front of the building, I'll use the term, there are the windows. And that's because a mezzanine area has been created there for a portion of the building. But then once you move to the back portion of the building, then it becomes clear span ceiling, and it's not 12 all the way through. And that's what the mezzanine space rent, the 3,000 odd square feet, that's what it's addressing. You know, a lot of these industrial buildings frequently create an opportunity for some office space or for an alternate slightly different use in a portion of the building. And so frequently there is a second level, a mezzanine of types within a building, and that's the case here.
Thank you.
Yeah, also, so that would prompt me to assume that there's a you know, a peaked roof here, that there isn't that the clearance is actually higher than the wall height. Is that also correct?
At certain points, certainly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you get the 721 for that storage mezzanine?
It is automatically generated in our system.
And that's what storage mezzanines generally go for, 721 a square foot?
Correct. For the space.
And how much clearance above that storage mezzanine is there to store things? How high would it go? Are you aware of that, or do you know that?
I am not aware of that, no.
Is that something the model would take into account?
It would, because right now it's grabbing the 12 feet.
Would you agree it's quite likely not 12 feet though above the mezzanine?
Most likely. Trying to see if I can find it differently here.
And there's no pictures of the inside, correct?
Correct, I wish I did. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any specifics for the mezzanine.
Okay. Fair enough. I have no further questions. Mr. Newman, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you. The issues on this file are the common issues, the rental rate and the capitalization rate. This is an owner-occupied premises. As you can see from the assessor's report, there's a rate of $9.14 for what I'll call the main portion of the building, and then $7.21 for some 3,132 square feet of mezzanine. I think the rent is too high. I think the capitalization rate is too low. At page 2 of my report, I've got a series of comparables of various storage warehouse type buildings. I've made reference to the wall heights and the timing of the leases, and you can see the rents range from at the low end, I guess, $5.95, and that one is Sherwin Road at the top of page 3. July of 2021 at a 20-foot wall, and to a high of $7.31 on St. Matthews in December of 20. So I ultimately select $7.50 a square foot for the rent, which I think is overall reasonable. The assessor, because she's using two different rates of $9.14 and $7.21, I believe that comes to a blended rate of $8.48. And you can actually see that, you don't have to jump there now, $8.78. You'll see that at page 18 of my brief when you see the assessor's calculation of value. I always put the average rent on that, and so you can see it's $8.78. And so at the end of the day, your decision point is a blended rate of $8.78 by the assessor, or a rate of $7.50 as I've selected. I do make the observation to you that of the assessor's comparables, and there were 6 of them, only 2 of them have a rate above what the assessor is proposing. Actually, that's, yes, 2 of them, and that was the Lawson Crescent space occupied by Acon Group. It's an engineering and multidiscipline professional firm. It's their office space. And then, of course, the Jade Transport on Dugald Road, specialized space for their specialized transport needs. Those are the only 2 rates that are above the assessor's rates. And I would say more generally, the assessor's rates are probably supportive of the $7.50. Back to the capitalization rate concept, and again, I won't belabor this because I've covered a lot of this, but again, it's the return the investor needs. Interest rates are rising. Industrial cap rates are coming up. There's the chart at page 6. You know, this is not an A-class building. Institutional investors will not buy a building of this type simply because of its size. The Altus capitalization rate analysis, at best, this is a B building, would put it in the range of 6.5 to 7.5%. What I say about the subject property is, in part of the building, it's going to have a lower ceiling clearance. Again, on the spectrum, you're not going to get government tenants in a building of this type. You've got a rising interest rate environment. It's not a Class A building. It's a metal building. At best, it's a B. The brokers put the range for Bs at 6 to 7.5. The city at the 20th and 80th for Bs is 5.35 to 7.3%. I'm selecting 6.5% in the middle of that range. And that, if you go to page 18, you see the assessor's calculation and my notation that the blended rate is $8.78. And then at page 19, you see my calculation of a value of $1,828,000, driven by $7.50 and a 6.5% cap rate. That's my submission. I'm open to questions.
Ms. Durakani, any questions for the applicant in this presentation?
I do. In regards to my comparables, because I presume you didn't have any, Mr. Newman?
Comparables?
Yeah,
Oh, I do.
I was gonna add to the comparables, there's also the 944 Henry Avenue. That's probably the most compatible one as well. Because
So I looked into that one, and my investigations reveal that it's occupied by G2 Logistics, and that a portion of the space is refrigerated space. And in fact, there's photos available online of the refrigerated area. And that's what my investigations revealed.
As far as I'm concerned, it was a good comparable with the similar storage warehouse aspect. I had a question in regards to it being owner occupied. You had made a comment about, I believe, about possibly having difficulty having it rented out. Do you suggest that that's even a worrisome at all? Do you suspect that they're wanting to rent out the space?
Well, the fact that it's owner occupied, I think ultimately is irrelevant. The question is what would happen in the marketplace? And so the question is, what's the appropriate rent from the market? What's the appropriate capitalization rate? Obviously, if they're doing business, they're likely to want to continue to stay there. Unless their business, like I said, in the context of other properties, has good things or bad things happen to it. The business fails, they won't be there. They need bigger space because business is going well. They'll look to relocate or expand the space. So ultimately, I'm not sure what the fact that an owner is occupying really has to do with it ultimately.
It is my understanding that they're the owners from the very beginning. I guess I'm referring to the cap aspect more so in regards to, do you think it should be a higher cap? I guess based on what parameters, with this being a newer build?
So the capitalization rate is a function of the investor's perception of risk. It's a function of the alternate investments available to an investor. Real estate always brings with it a higher level of risk than a GIC, for example, than a bond, a government bond. And so typically investors need more than is available on those types of investments. Real estate also brings with it the possibility of appreciation over the long term. And that's another reason why investors will look to real estate. So to be clear, I'm not saying the building is junk or it's horrible or anything like that. I'm not saying that. It's just a question of putting it into the proper place on the spectrum of capitalization rates. And all I say about that is this is not the very best quality. By its nature and size, institutional investors, pension funds, will never look at a building of this type. It's just too small. It's not of interest to them. And so again, I'm putting the capitalization rate sort of at the middle of the spectrum, because again, the building is fine, but they all have their place in the spectrum, and that's where I think this one is.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Ms. Duncan, any questions for the applicant?
Just back to the wall height. I think when I had asked the assessor, you had indicated no, that there is different wall heights, but I see in the brief that it's saying it's still 11 to 12. Is there a higher wall height, especially where the trucks go in and out at the back there?
Absolutely. Absolutely, there is.
All right, what would it be? Do you know at the?
My eyeball says to me that it's probably in the range of 25 feet.
And do you think that's about at least half the infrastructure seems to be the higher wall height?
I would agree. So I think the wall height is consistent throughout the entire building. I think the difference is in the front part of the building, you've got that mezzanine area that's been created. And so the ceiling clearance, as opposed to the exterior wall height, will be different in that area where the mezzanine is located, as compared with the rest of the building where there is no mezzanine.
Okay, thank you. No other questions.
Ms. Schultz, any questions for the applicant?
One question. So page 16, you are referencing the 1.5% vacancy rate. On your calculations, you're using 3% vacancy rate on page 19.
I have, my error, my bad, thank you.
So it should be the 1.5.
Yep.
Okay.
Could be 1.5.
Yes, that's the assessor's rate, and I'm not,
You're not disputing that.
I'm not contesting it for purposes of this hearing.
Okay, so it should be 1.5. So so what do you get for your value then?
Gonna revise your
Value?
value then, you
The
know?
net operating income will come up by half of the 3854, which would be about $1,927, if my mental math works, as it does sometimes. So 3854 divided by 2 is $1,927 plus 118,840 is 120,767 is the revised NOI, divided by 0.065 is $1,857,953.
Okay. And that's your new value.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's no further questions.
I get some different slightly different numbers than you, but I'm not going to worry about that. They're pretty close. I don't think I have any question. That then concludes item 695 meal sis. Now we could go to the next item, number 9. 1110 Sanford. Oh, excuse me, before we conclude item 6, anything in summation, Mr. Rocky?
Do not, thank you.
Mr. Newman?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Item number 9, 1110 Sanford. Ms. Newman, can you, Mr. Rockney, can you please begin your presentation?
I can, thank you. File number 24-3767, roll number 13001510000 for the address of 1110 Sanford Street. We're defending the assessed value of $2,332,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of 3 buildings with 19 premises with 1 story, built in 1963 with the wall height of 14 feet. A leasable area of 32,140 square feet with a land to plan area of 2.27. If I may bring your attention to page 2, there was a sale back in 2009 for $1,310,000. This appears to be a arm's length sale. We provided a few maps on page 3. It is situated off of Sargent Avenue near Empress Street. Aerial views provided on page 4 through 6, and some exterior photos onto page 7. We provided 11 comparables on page 8. And with the lease starting in 2018 to 2022, with the range of 1,040 to 4,902 square feet, a wall height range of 15 to 22 feet, and a net rent range of $6.15 to $9 per square foot. You will find our income workup on page 9. with the 19 premises totaling 32,140 square feet with a blended rent of $6.44. Provide a potential rent of 207,070. We reduced that by a vacancy loss of 10%, plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of 167,916, in which we've capitalized that at 7.20%, and generates our capitalized value of 2,332,167, and we rounded it down to 2,332,000. We'll find our capitalization rates on page 12, in which provides the industrial range of 5.35 to 7.30. Our cap rate of 7.20 is the high end of this range. We've provided a few permits on page 14 and 15. The first one is a permit in 2017 regarding structural alterations with a declared construction value of 170,000. And the second permit is in 2021 for interior alterations for a particular tenant, Heart to Home Meals, with a declared value of 15,000. Is a floor plan for that second permit on page 16. And page 17 to 20 is the income and expense information provided to us. I gathered on page 17 with the rent a $6.08. And a vacancy percentage on page 20 of 17.68%. They've advised. Based on this evidence, we would like to have our assessed value of $2,332,000 to be confirmed. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Mr. Newman, any questions for the assessor?
Yes. Towards the end, you talked about page 17, and which is the income statement. And you indicated that the rent reveals rent of $6.06, I think you said?
8 cents.
8 cents, okay. And what you're doing there is you're taking the commercial rent and you're dividing it by the square footage, and you're saying that comes to $6.08.
Correct.
Okay, just so I understand. Okay, so just looking at this this property, page 1 of your report, 14-foot wall heights, land to plan area 2.27. Both the wall height in relative terms is low, and the land to plan area in relative terms is low. Agreed?
Agreed.
So if we then jump ahead, your photos, again, 3 buildings, and essentially, you've got a lot of different bays in these buildings. So flipping through the photos, we get to page 9. Everything on page 9 is model driven, correct?
Correct.
And the leases in this building are predominantly gross leases, correct?
I don't believe they had completed the full income and expense report. They just provided the income statement, so it's difficult to really say what each one accumulates to, but it appears to be a net rent.
So if you look at page 19 of your report, there's a document that I believe calculates what the base rent is for all the tenants that are gross leases. Do you agree?
Does say gross there.
But what I'm telling you is what this document does, what I'm suggesting to you is that what this document does, this property manager, quite helpfully, frankly, submits a calculation of what the annual gross rent is and then figures out what the CAM is, what the tax is, and then does a calculation of what the net base rent is for each of these tenants. And then you see at the bottom on the right-hand side, you see a chart listing tenancies, and then it gets you to an average rent per square foot, which I think is $5.63.
I'll take your word.
That's what it does, I'm suggesting to you. Do you agree?
I'll take your word for it. Yes.
Okay, and then as you noted at page 20, the vacancy of 17.68% in 2022. Did you check the history of vacancy of this property?
I did not. No.
But the vacancy is set at 10%, so obviously something in the model is recognizing some historic vacancy issues with this property. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions for the assessor?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Page 17. I just want to clarify that here. So you have a net square foot rent of
$6.08 based on the 3005 code, their commercial rent. I did notice their mortgage payment below as well. I don't know if that's something to consider.
so how much did you say that they're actually paying per square foot?
It appears $6.08.
And your model is calculating what?
$6.44 based on all the premises. There's many premises there, so it's a blended rent we used.
$6.44. Still, something that's not jiving with me here.
All the individual spaces have different leasable areas. So that's why there's a bunch of different
Okay,
rent.
I'm there now, sorry. Okay, that's all I wanted to do is clarify a couple of things there, so. I have no further questions. We go to your presentation, Mr. Newman.
I think what I'm going to do is perhaps a little bit unusually start by turning you through the attachments to my presentation, because I think they tell the story. So if we start at page 21, that's the assessor's calculation available to me online when I start this process. And you see there the blended rate, as we've just discussed, of $6.44, and the other variables that the assessor is applying. If we go to page 23, that's my workup. I can tell you that my gross potential income is based on a rate of $5.65 per square foot. And I'll come back to all of this, but I'm just showing you. You see a 25% vacancy, and you see an 8% capitalization rate. I'll come back to all of this. You see at page 24, the building sections, in other words, when were they built, So all of the buildings were built in 1963, the different sizes for the buildings and the 14-foot wall height. And then begins the financial statements. So page 25 is the statement at December of 2022 for that year. And this is the one we were just looking at with the $195,350 of rent, which calculates to $6.08 a square foot. The handwriting at the bottom, the majority of it is mine. And so what you see is, and the numbers down the the left-hand column are ledger account numbers. That's what those are. And so ledger 9990 is the net income. And it tells you that the net income on this property was $5,646. But added back is $20,000 of leasing commissions, which turned into $26,279. And then I add back mortgage interest of $35,492. And what that tells us is that the net operating income in 2022 generated by the property was $61,771. And that compares with the assessor's $167,916. Then page 26 is the financial statement for 2021. Again, you see the commercial rent at the top of $202,000. So it's a little bit higher than it was in 22. But then we get down to the bottom of the page and we see negative $37,509. The commissions are added back. I then add back the debt service, and that gets me to a positive $6,387. I could actually add back one more number, which would be the $106,610, which is ledger 9115, which would get us to a net operating income, round numbers, $113,000. So I reference that. Then at page 27, again, the same financial statement, this time for 2020. And again, at the bottom, adding back the debt service, you see $17,988 of net operating income. Again, in theory, it could add back the tenant improvements, which is $18,720. That's going to take us into the range of $36,000 plus of NOI. Then page 28, the financial statement for 2019. Same thing, adding back the debt service and gets us to positive net operating income of $18,875. There's no tenant improvements to add back for this year. And then the financial statement for 2018, doing the same thing, adding back the debt service to a negative $114,000. And that would bring the negative number down to $71,000. And again, no debt service here. I give you all of this because, again, properties with gross leases are a little bit more complicated to figure out sometimes. But this property obviously has historic issues. Then at page 30, I start with the vacancy. And again, this property manager, their management systems are quite good because they do it to the day. They calculate the vacancy to the day. And so in this case, in 2022, it was 17.68%. In 2021, it was 10.06%. In 2020, it was 39.51%. In 2019, go to page 34, it was 37.16%. And in 2018, it was 44.73%. Again, just so you'll understand what the vacancy history of the property is. Page 36 is the same page that's in the assessor's questionnaire. This one is blown up a little more. It's a little bit easier to read. And you can see that what this does is it presents the net rent that is being generated essentially by each of the tenants. And it indicates that it comes out to an average of $5.65 per square foot. So, and I told you, and I'll come back to it, in my spreadsheet calculating value, that's the rate I ultimately use. You see the same calculation for 2021 at $5.59 a square foot, for 2020 at $4.97 a square foot. So you see what the property is really generating in terms of bottom line rent to the landlord. Then page 39 and following is a roof report. Speaking to the condition of the roof, there should be on page 39 an arrow in the right-hand margin. Hopefully that's visible to you.
I have it.
And what that points to is the cost of the $105,000 to replace the roof on that building. And then, excuse me. And then I jump ahead to page 41, and what it points to there, the arrow again, is the cost of $25,000 to do miscellaneous repairs. So, and the balance of the report, the balance of the pages is the roof report. So now what I'm going to do is I've, again, started by going through the attachments. Now I'm going to bring you to my text, because I think maybe this will all make a little more sense for you and be easier to follow as I now go through the text. So now I'm to page 2. In the top section, the property, I tell you essentially what the assessor's assessment is and how it's arrived at $2,332,000. I talk about the land to building ratio, and I talk about 14-foot walls, meaning clear span will be less, 11 to 12 feet. I say the issues are rent vacancy and capitalization rate. On the rents, starting at page 3, I talk about the fact that a number of the tenants have gross leases. Assessor uses 644, which creates potential income of $207,000. I point out, and now you've seen them, the property manager has calculations that show what the net effective rent is for each tenant. In 2022, it's $5.65. I tell you I'm going to use that to create my gross potential income, and I'll take you back to that in a moment. And then I show you the financial statements, and I show you what the net operating incomes are. Sorry, what the rent receipts are. So bottom half of page 3 are what the rent receipts, actual rent receipts are by the landlord in each of those years. And obviously that's impacted by vacancy to some extent, but that's what they are. But keep in mind, many of these are gross leases. So there's expenses that come out of these rental receipt amounts. Page 4, I give you the history of the vacancy. The average vacancy is 29.828%. The assessor's net operating income is $167,916. The financial statements are attached, as I've said to you, and the property's never achieved a net operating income of $167,000 or anywhere close. And I appreciate that as I went through those statements on, I think, 2 of them, I made a further adjustment to add back the tenant improvement allowance. And so those numbers will come up a little bit on a couple of them, but not very much and not in any material way. Vacancy, 10% I say is not adequate. I've told you the story on vacancy. At page 5, I give you an excerpt from a municipal board decision, October of 2022, 75 Skirfield versus the city assessor, where the board addressed the concept of chronic vacancy. And essentially what the board says is no prospective purchaser presented with a large vacancy rate over an extended period of time and how much effort went into the failed attempt to lease the property would pay full value. And so I end up selecting 25%. But what I tell you as well is there is professional competent management here, and you can actually see it in some of the photos. Colliers is the leasing agent for this property and has been for years. And again, I say that in some of the photos, you can actually see the Colliers signage at the front of the property. So they are making considerable efforts to continue to lease the property. But obviously there's a history here of difficulties with the property. And based on the municipal board decision, which says a prospective purchaser is not going to ignore vacancy, I select 25% as the vacancy, which is below the 5-year average of 29.8%. Then we come to cap rate. And again, it's much the same conversation that I've pointed to you before. So I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to jump you to page 16. Here's where I make reference to a study published by Altus, in which they analyze a number of buildings. And at page 17, you can see their conclusion that a B building is going to be 6.5 to 7.5, sorry, 6.5, yeah, 6.5 to 7.5. But I don't think this is a B building. I think this is a non-investment grade building. The wall heights are low. The land to building ratio is not good. There's a history of vacancy. So they say for non-investment grade, it would be 7.5% plus at April 1 of 23. With additional risk factors, they note that wall heights less than or equal to 14 feet, land to building ratio less than 3 to 1. So those are all additional factors. And then at page 18, I come to my conclusions. So again, low land to building ratio, history of chronic vacancy, 29.8% average, low ceiling clearance, roof report issues, small business tenants, not strong covenants, frequent turnover, leads to vacancy and increased costs. You're not getting government or institutional quality tenants in a building of this type. Interest rates are going up. It's a high risk property. And so what I do ultimately, you see my conclusion on page 19, is I use $5.65, which creates a potential income of $181,591, which compares with the assessor's $207,000. So we've got a difference there of about $26,000. That'll be a decision point for you. I use a 25% vacancy, the assessor's at 10. I use a net operating income of $99,967, and I'll take you back to the spreadsheet in a moment. I use an 8 cap, and I come to a value of $1,249,000. The net operating income I use of $99,000 is higher than anything that they've achieved over the last number of years by a long shot. Let me then take you to the spreadsheet. So that's page 23. And you can see there, as I've told you, that I'm using $5.65. So that creates potential income of $181,591, the 25% vacancy, the $4 shortfall, the 3% non-recoverable, $99,967 of net operating income at an 8 cap, and that drives the value. That's my submission. I'm open to questions.
Mr. Rockney, any questions for the applicant?
You. Your final value, Mr. Newman, is $1,249,000.
That's correct.
Did you have a chance to look at the sale from 2009, if it was confirmed that it was a good sale.
If you're asking me whether it's arm length, to the best of my knowledge, yes.
In regards to the vacancy, because I think we're not agreeing with the vacancy rate there. Do you have any thoughts as to the possibility it could be in regards to the permit that was placed in 2017 with the structural alterations? Or no?
I don't see why that would be an issue.
Do you happen to know what the vacancy is currently?
As of today, I don't know. Not relevant, but I also don't know.
Fair enough. The most recent vacancy percentage that they claimed was the 7.68%.
17.68. Yes.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
Yes, please. Just one. In regards to the vacancy rate, so you've got 2018, 19, and 20, where you're averaging like 44, 37, 39. With the tenants that are in the building, would that have any effect because of COVID?
I don't believe so. These are small businesses. The units are small. These are not units where you've got a lot of people in the premises.
Or clients coming in? Like I know that there's some, if it's a massage or a,
These are service type industries or businesses rather.
Okay. All right, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Duncan, any questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry if it's obvious and I'm not seeing it. So the actuals, as you mentioned, for the prior 4 years are significantly lower from an NOI perspective. And then you have an NOI of 99967. So what elements of your calculation in your spreadsheet did you use a different number than what the actuals were? Does that make sense, the question?
Yes. So what I would say to you is that for the gross potential income, the $5.65 I used is an actual in the sense that it's the property manager calculated average rent per square foot derived from the space. The vacancy, the shortfall of $4 is the assessors. The non-recoverable of $3 is the assessors. The vacancy allowance of 25% is below the average performance of the property. And of course, the cap rate is a selected number.
Okay. Okay, thank you. No other questions.
What's your thoughts on why there was a significant vacancy issue with this property?
I think it's just, and again, it comes back to these older buildings and their quality and, there's business people out there who their businesses are small, they're starting out, or they've been around for a while, but they're not that successful. They struggle. There's only a certain level of rent they can pay. The business fails sometimes. And so this property, for a combination of reasons, undoubtedly, again, it's got lower wall heights, lower clear ceiling heights. It's an older property. It's a lot of small bays. It attracts a certain type of small business client, occupant, tenant. And I think those businesses just tend to come and go, and there's turnover. And for good reasons and bad reasons, as I said earlier, their businesses fail, they're gone. their businesses succeed, they move to better space. It's all those things, but every time there's turnover, it costs the landlord money. It costs leasing commissions, which we're not factoring in here, but it costs vacancy, there's downtime, there's always that kind of turnover. And I just think that's the story on this building. From a putting it in the spectrum again, as I've said earlier, it's just not that attractive a property, relatively speaking.
Is there a property manager managing the
There
property
is.
for the owner?
Yes, Ash Management is the property
And they
manager.
do lots of other properties in Winnipeg?
Absolutely. They're an ongoing client of mine. I look at 70 or 80 properties on their behalf.
And they would be looking after getting tenants for these places.
So
100%.
it's two things that are looking after tenancies. One is Colliers, and again, you see in the photos, you see the Colliers signage. And I'm telling you, Colliers have been the leasing agent for years and years on this property. So they're active. And of course, the property manager, as management, is also active. And as I said to you, you see from their reporting in the sense that they give you the vacancy calculated to the day, which I don't see many property managers doing. But that's one of their systems. That's how they do it. So certainly they know what they're doing and they've been around a long time.
I have no further questions. Anything in summation, Mr. Aughney?
No, thank you.
Mr. Newman, anything in summation?
I'm good as well.
That then concludes item 9, 11, 10, Sanford. And I believe that's all of the items today on the docket. So we have heard all the items scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned.
Good morning, almost afternoon, but good morning to all.
Thank you very much, Miss, for your presentation.
Thank you all.
Bye.
I sometimes think when we get these dockets of 8, 9, or 10, and we clean some up here.